warm welcome to Political Economy with Shweta Punj. This is a very significant time for us as a nation. India is facing a very volatile neighborhood and a very complicated geopolitical situation. We are in the middle of some very crucial trade negotiations, one with the United States and the other with the European Union. As India negotiates in an increasingly protectionist world while safeguarding interests of its farmers and MSMEs, we've also accelerated the reform push. GST 2.0 has rationalized a very complicated tax structure into a very simple two-rate tax structure, and that we understand is just the beginning. Well, I have with me Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, a member of the Prime Minister Economic Advisory Council and Vice Chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, on what these reforms could mean for India, what could these next generation reforms look like for India. And of course, Mr. Sanyal has been a long time observer and a documenter of Modinomics. So who better than Mr. Sanyal to explain what GST 2.0 will mean for India. Mr. Sanyal, thank you so much for joining us. Let me begin with GST 2.0, the reforms that have been announced. And you were part of the team that put together, that worked on GST 1.0. So take us through the timing of this decision, and why is it that Navratri was chosen as the first date to implement? Why wasn't it put into force immediately? Because businesses were complaining that this deferred rollout will completely mean that sales go for a complete toss within that 2 to 3 week period.
So whenever we introduced it, we have to give some transition time. So in any case, this is a period that is just before the Navratra start, tends to be a lull period. So, is as good a time as any other, because you can't suddenly put this in. There are things that need labeling and all kinds of changes need to be done. So you have to give some transition time at some point. So that is why. But let me tell you a little bit of the longer history.
Yeah.
When you go back to 27, you have to remember what the focus then is. Focus is, you have this old system, extremely complicated, all kinds of different service tax, excise tax, sales tax, and you are putting them into a new system. That new system is untested. So that transition into the new system is what the focus was. And what you didn't want at that time is further complication caused by the fact that the tax rates became completely new. So the decision was taken at that time that let's focus on the transition to the new GST system, and the tax rates are just flicked into the nearest bucket that we have. So in the old days there would be something, and if you remember, there was something, specific items would have been 16.5, something would be 23 and 1/4.
Very complicated.
And completely non-intuitive things. So what was thought, look, at least this is some level of simplification, let's just put it in the nearest bucket. So there was no first principles working out of why something should be in some bucket. It just was the nearest one of what was there in the pre-GST period. So then it took about 2 years odd to just stabilize this system, get it to work, etc. And then COVID hit. So now another 2.5 years went in that. So then when we came out of COVID, we said, okay, let the economy recover to some level of strength. And so by the time that we were all confident that we can now do another round of change, it was already in 2024.
Okay.
So what did we want to do? Well, at that time you will know, the debate discussion was, look, there are way too many slabs, and this is something that the late Bibek Devroy had repeatedly made a point about. I have also talked about it many times. The other thing was that the items were, since they hadn't been worked out from first principles, were all kind of random places. So you would end up with these somewhat arcane debates about should sweet popcorn and salted popcorn be taxed at the same rate.
The infamous popcorn debate.
Yes, infamous pop. The reason is that because you will have these kinds of illogical debates because the whole architecture is not based on anything other than what things were on before GST.
Okay.
So it said, okay, we'll reduce the number of slabs, number one. So now we've got 2. And very importantly, and in some ways perhaps even more importantly, they will now be in logical slabs. So yes, there will be some debate still at the margin, but by and large, if you know what an item is, you can just by common sense work out where that item is likely to be taxed.
Okay.
Okay. So now you have something like cement. Everybody use cement. I also agree it shouldn't be taxed at 28%. But because it used to be taxed high earlier, so it ended up at 28%. Now we have put it in something that is more reasonable, like 18%.
Right.
Most food type items will end up at 5%. Loose food will end up at 0%. So I don't even know of a specific, any item you get me, I would with a 99% accuracy be able to tell you which bucket it is supposed to be without too much debate about the matter. Now this gets rid of a lot of pointless debates that used to happen earlier, because there are thousands of millions of products. Each one of them, if you have to specifically say that this has to be here or there, sweet popcorn, salt popcorn, this whole debate is now meaningless.
Right. So the crucial aspect of the success of GST 2.0 is also going to be whether businesses will pass on the tax rate.
Well, the expectations is that they will. But let's see how that works out. I think the signal has been given by the government that it should be allowed to pass through. But then we didn't want to create another Inspector Raj trying to enforce it. So this will to some extent have to be done by public pressure. And there is also the thing that we wanted to make sure is that all the processes also. So there was all these things that over time the old license permit Raj had quietly come back. So some amount of Inspector Raj was
Absolutely.
there in terms of
the GST
notices. Also the thing that just for registration, the idea was that anybody registers and quite quickly you get your number. But over a period of time that process had become complicated, and we had heard lots of complaints about it. So again, a system has, yes, there are sometimes genuine misuse, so it's not like the other side of the story is not true. But usually for 2-3% of the cases, 98% of the system would be stalled. And of course, the resultant rent seeking, harassment, etc. that comes with it. So as you may have heard, that process has also been significantly smoothened.
Simplified. So you said that you didn't want to bring in Inspector Raj. But is there a mechanism in the works, or is there a mechanism, a broad structure in place to ensure that this happens, that the rate cuts are passed on? Because we've been speaking to business owners off the record, and they have actually expressed apprehensions about passing on the rate cuts. They have suggested that they might increase the size of packaging, they might increase the product size, but to reduce the MRP might be a challenge for them in the FMCG space, for instance.
We'll see how it goes, but I have very little sympathy other than the minor issue of labeling. So you're already printed and the product is in the supply chain, maybe it can, but that's a transition issue. Right. Beyond that, I have no sympathy about the matter.
Because
so if you are taxing something less, they should pass it on. What argument is there against not passing it on?
Insurance companies are crying about it. They are saying 0% will act.
No, I'm sorry. There is very little sympathy one can have for them. By removing that 18% tax, I think it was 18%.
Yeah.
We have dramatically opened up the market for them. So it is up to them to now come up with some useful products that they can, that should be now, available for consumers. So rather than whine about this, what they should do is to come up with more innovative products which are in sync with what the new expanded demand system will be.
Because over the years, if we look at corporate India, we've reduced tax rates for them. There's been a lot of focus on ease of doing business. Having done all of that, we've not seen an increase in private investment. The government has been urging the private sector to come forward and invest. Now we see rationalization of GST. What is holding back the private sector? What is it? They'll go out and invest. We've seen that companies here have gone and invested in Africa and other developing countries. But when we talk about expansion within India, they have not been as forthcoming or as aggressive.
So while one has to be careful of sort of broad brush thing, there are private sector companies that are going out there and really aggressively investing. So it's not true for everybody, but it is true that having nurse them back. Remember, there used to be this big major problem with twin balance sheet problems.
Right.
The banks being bust and the corporate balance sheets being bust. And so both those balance sheets and the government balance sheet itself have dramatically improved over time. The banks are in rude health, and corporate India is making record profits. So that now the question now is, having brought them back, do you expect them to begin investing? Well, as I said, some of them are, but it is also the case that what has happened is that there is a in many sort of sectors, there is perhaps not adequate amount of competition, and there is no pressure, therefore, on the entrepreneurs in that sector to innovate. So, if you see, research and development is also quite weak. I mean, Indian corporate sector invests very little in R&D.
Right.
Why don't they? Because in some ways we protect, perhaps mollycoddle and protect them too much. Now, it may have been necessary to provide that protection to bring them back from the fragile five environment. But now they are healthy, they are making record profits, their market is growing. I think the time has come to find ways of, opening things up, of getting more competition into the market. I certainly don't think there's a case for protecting, entrepreneurs who feel that they can sit and run family offices from Dubai, for example. Why should we be protecting that? If you're on the shop floor here innovating, we are all in favor of it. But family offices from Dubai is not, doesn't justify providing protection. If you're not coming up with new products, if you're not using the space and domestic market created to go out there and capture markets abroad, that is what really this domestic market that has been created is for. It is not to milk for feel good things like, as I said, family offices in Dubai is not what this is for.
Okay, even as you say this, that this is not for no time for us to protect industry, we are in a very protectionist world. You have US President Donald Trump protecting American industry, and we are also in the middle of some very crucial negotiations, one with the United States, the other with the EU, and we've just concluded an FTA with the UK where we've opened up our automobile sector to imports from the United Kingdom. So I want to get a sense from you on the next generation of reforms that the government is thinking of. Will we see more barriers going down when it comes to, allowing foreign investors and foreign companies to come and set up here? Do we see more sectors opening up?
So, as far as the tariffs issue is concerned, we have been quite clear. We did not escalate the matter at any stage, but we have also not backed down.
Right.
And I think the signal has gone through quite clearly to the US and to others that we are negotiating with. But we will not be unreasonable and we will not escalate matters, but we will also simply not back down on things that we think are our interests. So, on that count, let me be clear that we will protect Indian interests. At the same time, we do want investors to come, whether it's domestic investors or foreign investors. We do want them to invest in this country. As I said, Make in India is our mantra, but anybody can come here and make in India. We want domestic industry to make in India, we want foreign companies to come and make in India, we want old companies to make in India, we want new startups to make in India. So, we want to be as open as possible, and a lot of the things we are doing in terms of ease of doing business, deregulation, etc. is related to this thinking.
Okay, I want to also understand from you on how are we viewing China, because for several years China had become a pariah, especially around COVID and after that. But now we are having a bit of a rethink on how to deal with China, how to work with China. Our trade deficit with China continues to be very high. Also, the significance of the India-China relationship, it takes more importance now in the considering the global context that we are seeing. So, in a very complicated scenario, how do we walk that fine line that we get the best out of China, yet we protect our economic sovereignty?
So let's be very clear that for all the types of friction we have with China, we cannot wish them away. They are a global power and they are a major source of all manner of industrial inputs. So we have to learn to deal with them. Obviously, in our terms, we still have to learn to deal with them. Now, in that context, it's good that there's been a thaw in our relationship with them. And as I said, there are many industries in India which rely heavily on inputs from China. Now, in some of those cases, we may want to create our own domestic capability, but you can't do this for everything. So there will be a role for Chinese imports or even investment, and I think we should be open to that. Obviously, I don't want them taking over our telecom industry, but there are areas where the Chinese will play a role. And for example, if we want to be in the smartphone manufacturing business, we simply wouldn't be able to do it if we didn't import significant large numbers of inputs from not just China but other countries as well. So if you want to be in the global supply chain, you cannot wish away China. So we have to be pragmatic about this. Now, as I said, that doesn't mean we rush to join RCEP. We are unlikely to do that. But there will be many areas where we will collaborate even as we compete with them.
There's a counter view to that too, that maybe India could have considered joining RCEP at that time, but that's for another discussion. The Prime Minister's office had a meeting and Niti Aayog was part of it. You were there in that meeting where the next generation of reforms were discussed and a 100-day agenda was set out. Ministries have been asked to come back with the ideas and their game plan. What are these next generation reforms going to focus on, and what are they going to look like?
So there are a whole bunch of things we need to do. I mean, a lot of it requires really straightening out the 1,000 small things that add friction to the system. So, usually the newspaper headlines focus on what is called structural reform, which are big structural things like introduce GST or create the insolvency and bankruptcy code or shift to inflation targeting and so on. Now, we can do some more of those things, but the bulk of what really causes friction in the system is not these big things. It's actually a myriad small things. So you have to really sit in there and do these things which I call process reforms. And so these process reforms are very important, and they can be of various kinds. One is that they are government processes that can be, there could be a law, there could be a regulation, there could be an administrative process. Those can be smoothened out. Then we also need to go and look at the structure of the government itself, like the central government. There are all kinds of bodies in the government. Are these bodies needed? Are there outdated bodies you can shut down? Is the distribution of civil servants correct for today's needs? I mean, so all of these kinds of things are important parts of process reforms of the system or reforms of government architecture. So these are the kinds of things that we need to do, and some of them are pretty major efforts.
So when can we expect some movement on this?
So we are doing that. By the way, this is not new. We have been doing it anyway. I myself been involved in several of these. There has now been a committee set up under Mr. Rajiv Gauba, the former cabinet secretary. He was now he's a member of Niti Aayog. You may have seen so he will be looking at some of the
process reform,
the deregulation part of it. So process reform is a big area, it's a general word. So there's the space for deregulation. So particularly for business ease, that bit he is looking at.
Okay.
Then there are a whole host of other things, ease of living type issues. I'll give you one example. I had myself written about, for example, EPFO.
Right.
So I have made quite a big fuss about it, and I hear the Labour Ministry is now working to sort that out. I'm myself working in a similar thing which relates to the IEPFA, that's the Investor Education and Protection Fund. That's where unclaimed shares go to die. So if you ever have unclaimed shares you inherited or something like that, it is impossible to get your money out. So that fund has got something almost like a lakh crore worth of lying there, and they get about 8,000 crores worth of shares of dividends coming in new, plus new stuff gets piled onto it. So its corpus is growing, but they are only able to give back in any year about 2,000-3,000 crores worth. So I looked into the matter, and this is what I discovered. First of all, the system has three different websites. One website where the claimant puts their stuff in. Once all the approvals goes, there are two separate websites, one for giving their money back and the other for giving the dividends back, which is a separate website altogether, and they don't talk to each other. So
sounding like
the
a
people,
nightmare.
No, yes, wait, this is not the end of it. Then the person has to manually, the officials have to manually take all the information from one, put it in the other in order to give the share back. So then I mapped the entire process and I discovered that the whole process from the point you put in your application to the point you get your money is 25 steps. If on the 24th step you make a mistake,
you go back.
You go back to step 1. So it's like snakes and ladders, except it doesn't have ladders. Okay, so it's an unbelievably inefficient process. So I am working right now with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and smoothing this out. By end of this year, the new integrated website, so those 3 websites will get integrated, and this 25 steps, first we'll bring it down to 15 and then ultimately to maybe single digits. And smoothen it out. So what will happen is what used to take years to do, we can do in days if not weeks.
And what about the shares that are lying already?
So many of the existing stuff will onboard it onto this new system.
Okay.
Yeah, onboarded into the new system, and the new claims will of course be done entirely in the new system. And it will be done by the end of this, so 4 more months, please wait. And then we'll see first 6 months of 2026 if we are able to this is easily measurable, right? Has there been a dramatic increase in the number of shares given back or not?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I will be able to tell you by this time next year whether I managed to simplify it or I failed.
Well, that's a really heartening thing to hear, because when Prime Minister Modi was voted into power, he spoke about minimum government and maximum governance, right? But over the years, we've seen not a dramatic reduction in the number of ministries or in the size of the government, and I think somewhere we probably have reconciled.
So I think some part of it is not true. Okay. We have actually removed hundreds of outdated laws. We can give you a list of them somewhere. Similarly, I've been personally involved in dramatically simplifying many things, and many things.
No, that's true. We've made progress.
For example, it used to require 77 clearances to fly a drone.
Okay.
So I and this government official who was then in PMO, now he's in Taiwan, Manhar Yadav, over a few weekends, we reduced it from 77 to 7. That's how the entire drone sector took off. Then there used to be a monopoly earlier of the survey of India on all maps in the country.
Yes.
So technically, Google Maps, which all of you used to probably used to come here also, that was technically illegal. Okay. So it was somewhere during the COVID period that I wrote a note which eventually got implemented, which ended the monopoly of the survey of India. Then I personally can take some credit of shutting down all kinds of useless bodies in the government of India.
Give me some examples.
Tariff Commission. There was All India Handicraft Board, All India Handloom Board. There used to be Children's Film Society, because it was not closed, it was merged, but anyway, it disappeared as an entity. I could keep going. And some of these bizarre bodies, nobody knew what they did.
So now what's next on your target? Because you are working on process reforms, you are identifying agencies that are redundant or no longer needed.
So I have been working on this, as I said, even when I was in Finance Ministry. These are the ones that I talked about because they have been completed. We are right now doing an exercise of mapping the government to see where all various agencies and all are. And once that is completed before the end of the year, we will have a very good sense of the landscape of the central government. How many bodies it has, how many people are in each of those bodies, and so on. And that will allow us then to be able to see if the government can be restructured. And one of the interesting things of all of this is that, in fact, the government of India, the union government, is perhaps not too large. It's probably too small, contrary to what people think. The problem is that there are too many people in outdated parts of the government and not enough people in the bits that should grow. So there is the more severe problem is not that there are too many people, but the more severe problem is that it's all imbalanced.
That's an interesting observation, because you're right. The perception is.
I mean, how many people do we have in cybersecurity? Almost nobody. I mean, very small number. Whereas this should be a huge department with large numbers of people. We don't. But there are, other outdated departments with lots of people. So.
Any outdated departments that have been identified?
Yes, they have, but I'm not in a position to right now talk about it.
Okay, so but you're expected to submit this mapping report?
So this mapping is an ongoing process. It's still getting done.
Any timeline that you're working on?
As I said, by end of the year, something will come out of it.
Okay, and I'm assuming that this is part of the next generation reforms. This whole streamlining process that.
And by the way, this process reform and all of this that we talked about from central government. Exact same thing can be done at the state government level, and I have myself gone and made presentations about how to do process reforms in state capitals. And I have also begun to work on teaching this in some of our administrative institutions like Labasna and so on. So we are trying to put it as part of the thinking that the bureaucracy has as part of its daily thinking. Because one of the problems is that you can blame the bureaucracy for not doing these things, but the fact is there's nothing in their training which trains them to how to do reforms. So what happens is that every official is reinventing the wheel.
You have spoken about bureaucracy in the past also very emphatically. Now, even the next generation reforms that we are talking about, or GST, they will ultimately be implemented by bureaucrats.
Yes.
So, what is your view on upgrading the skill sets, maybe? Or
so a lot of work has gone into this. The Mission Karma Yogi is part of that. But I think one of the major issues that we need to do is to simply have the bureaucracy in the right place. Okay, so there are very major departments of government of India where should have more people. We don't have enough people. And there are.
But they should be bureaucrats according to you. They
can be bureaucrats. They can be consultants. Whatever. I mean, that depends on that particular activity. But I'm just saying that the distribution of people across the government has to be really relooked at, because that is a very serious issue, and nobody has looked into this since independence. So basically, we just the British built upon what was there with the East India Company, and then after independence we built on what we added a layer of socialism to it, and then after 1991, okay, some by organic attrition some change may have happened, but by and large there has never been a full relook. By the way, this is not only an Indian government problem. I talked about this mapping of government issue to major agencies. I've gone and made this presentation in international bodies and so on. And everywhere, every government in the world thinks that this is a major issue. In fact, Doge was an attempt to do something in these lines, but they kind of lost their way somewhere very quickly, in fact, within months. But I have been now at this for a good 8 years.
So do we see this initiative transforming into a separate department on the lines of Doge?
No, please don't create another department. My job is to not have more departments.
Okay,
this is a bad
but there
idea.
is only one Sanjeev Sanyal, and the government is
so the idea is
country.
So the idea is so it's one Sanjeev Sanyal because you're talking to that Sanjeev Sanyal. There are other members of the government who are doing this. I mentioned earlier Rajiv Gobaji, who has been given the job to do this. Certain efforts like this are happening from the cabinet secretaries thing. So throughout the system, different versions of this are going on. I obviously talk about my reforms because I did them. But that doesn't mean there aren't other parts of the government that are doing their other things.
Okay, fair enough. I also want to get a sense from you on the impact of this whole tariff war that we're seeing on the Indian economy. Now, we've already seen a dip in trade numbers where India-US trade is concerned. Our shipments to the US went down by nearly half in August as compared to July. So, if this goes on for a while, MSMEs are very vulnerable to this, there are jobs at stake. What's the thinking in the government on, moving and acting at the right time? We have to be very...
So obviously we do understand that there are certain segments of the economy which will get affected by these tariffs. But let me say that we are cognizant of this issue and we are providing certain amount of support to them and will do more if necessary. Indeed, this simplification of the GST itself is a relief because there were a lot of inverted duties and all that. So, in fact, one of the sectors that would benefit from this is textiles. So, I mean, this alone provides them certain amount of comfort, but we will do more if necessary. Let's see how long this goes, but meanwhile, of course, the negotiations between India and the US on a trade deal are also progressing, as you are aware. So, let's see how that works out.
Okay, any estimates on the employment situation in the country? Because we are already seeing the IT sector being very, very cautious on their hiring outlook. We are seeing layoffs there, and that's the organized space. Now, if the tariff was continuing...
So obviously we have to see how this works out, but so far the experience is the following. If you keep growth going at a decent pace, jobs come. And the best data we have on unemployment and jobs comes from the PLFS. It is quite emphatic that we had that as we came out of COVID and the economy accelerated, unemployment came down quite steadily. So it's not that our economy doesn't generate jobs. In fact, I have said this before, there is no such thing as jobless growth. All growth generates jobs. Some may create more, some may create less, but all growth creates jobs. So our job is to maintain this growth momentum. The growth, as you know, came out, the first quarter number came out at 7.8%, very strong number.
Yeah.
Now,
and there's been a lot of controversy around that number also. Controversy or questions raised around that number.
No, I think
all... That the deflator has been quite high, and that's one of the reasons.
Or it fits with all the parameters. That's what GDP is. GDP is ultimately generated by a certain methodology. If that methodology gives numbers of a particular kind, I think it's fair that you have to accept it. And by the way, you can see that in many other things as well. I mean, the banks are profitable, the companies are profitable,
right.
And so on. Yes, some sectors will go up and down. That's the nature of the beast. But the momentum is there. Now, does this tariff issue cause a loss of momentum? Well, we'll have to see. Obviously, at the margin, it will hurt. But will it be the case that we will go from, let's say we go from 7.8 to something a little bit, let's say 7 or even little bit less than 7. I think it's still momentum enough that it's generating jobs. Maybe not as much as we would like, but it's still generating jobs. And we have enough monetary and fiscal space to provide support, particularly monetary space, given that inflation is so weak. There is no stress on the system at all. The external accounts are very well behaved. We just got an upgrade. Inflation is, in fact, if anything, too low. So in that environment, it creates lots of leeway for doing macroeconomic demand support if necessary. But that also we need to see.
And what's your outlook on the rupee? Today, after nearly 2 weeks, we saw the rupee recover just a little bit on the, on the whole buzz about India-US trade. How much of a concern is it? Because the rupee is...
The rupee, you have to understand, the well-established policy of the Reserve Bank for decades now is to let the rupee find its own level. It's not like we target any level. The rupee will go to any level, and the reason for that is very obvious. If you allow for free capital flows, and we have fairly free capital flows, and you target monetary policy, then the exchange rate has to be free. In economics, it's called the impossible trinity. you cannot control all three, once you have capital flows, you cannot both control monetary policy and the exchange rate.
Sure.
We have a monetary policy committee. They control monetary policy. Therefore, the exchange rate is a derivative. And the most we can do is use foreign exchange reserves to lean against the wind. But other than that, the exchange rate should find its own level, and that's basically what we have done.
Okay.
And why should it be a concern? I mean, is inflation an issue? No.
No.
So why do you care where the exchange rate is?
And
if it's weak, it's good. No, I mean, it helps the exporters get the cushion that you have been arguing for. So what's the problem?
Okay. Also on disinvestment, there was again a lot of excitement and expectations around a very renewed agenda towards divesting stakes in public sector companies. However, that lost some of the steam last year, and we've seen a very subdued performance on that end.
So we are willing to keep doing that. Privatization and disinvestment remains a part of our agenda. And as and when it is thought that the market is right and the timing is right, we will do it. It's not something we need to rush into doing. It's not the government, desperately in need of money. So we will do it as it comes.
Okay. I want to talk to you about a tweet, a post on X that you had put out after the Nepal crisis. And you said that there is a pattern, with what's happened in Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and now, there is this whole talk that there could be a foreign hand involved or not, whatever the case might be. But how vulnerable is India in a situation where our neighborhood is looking so volatile? It impacts us in many ways.
We certainly should, take care to watch what happens. As I stated then, and I'll state again, the way in which these kinds of sudden spirals up happen, one has to ask, is there a pattern in all of this? And so what you saw in Sri Lanka, then in Bangladesh, and also in Nepal, very similar kinds of things are there, and there are rumors and otherwise of foreign NGOs, of particularly USAID funded NGOs which were involved in all of this. One can look into the matter, but certainly the fact that these kinds of things have happened and happened in a certain kind of pattern is something we should look into. After all, we have also had things like farmer protests,
right, which have gone on for a very long time.
Shaheen Bagh and all of this, with very similar patterns, funded by very similar kinds of agencies. And all of this, by the way, happens in a wider global context of narrative manipulation done by the likes of VDEM Institute in Sweden. All of these funded again by the same Soros's Open Society and USAID and other kinds of agencies. So there is a certain consistent pattern to it. Now, whether or not they are operating in India and can do something is something that we should keep our eyes about. I'm not saying that every protest is caused by this, but to be wary of these is something that I think every sort of sovereign nation should. It's our business to keep track of this.
So clearly, if one were to go by this argument, these agencies are also tapping into some inherent frustration somewhere, and they're capitalizing on that. So, that also, like you said, that India needs to watch out for this.
See, look, in any large population, there will always be some people who are disgruntled. They may be disgruntled for good reasons or bad reasons, that we can debate. There will always be the question is that then being built upon and being spiraled out, or is it this organic? Now, if it's organic, okay, I mean, things happen, but there is some reason to believe that it is not entirely organic. Yeah, and we, as I said, we ourselves saw it. The linkages with some of the, for example, Khalistani groups or jihadi groups which may have been linked to, for example, all those events that happened a few years ago in Delhi itself, and some of those people involved in it then ended up being jailed and still are in jail.
Does it worry you, Sanjeev, looking at the events around the world? We had Charlie Kirk's assassination. happened in the most brutal way. Then, of course, the protests in Nepal, which completely went out of control. That the world is very, very divided now. How do we come back from this? Where do we go
Look,
from
the
here?
world will always.
As someone who's documented histories, right?
So look, the world always has turbulence. There is no thing that, we live in a particularly turbulent world. Actually, the world is at every point in history turbulent. Okay, if you just go back 5 years ago, we were in the middle of COVID crisis. That was pretty much pretty turbulent. Go back 10 years from that, you'll say, oh my God, we've just had the financial crisis. We had the Mumbai attacks and
9/11, yes.
yeah. If you go back another 10 years from that, you had 9/11, and then before that you had the dot-com bust. A little bit before that you had the Asian crisis. Go back another 10 years before that, the Soviet Union collapsed. 1991, our own economy collapsed, and when we did our reforms. So the point I'm making to you is that the world is naturally an unstable place. And at every point in time, now some periods may be more unstable and turbulent than others, but there is, the system is unstable enough that at any point in time it can go down multiple pathways. So as those who manage countries and economies and so on, they need to be cognizant of the fact that these things can at any point go off kilter, even in the best of times. In addition to the natural instability, there are also parties who want to cause anarchic situations for their own benefit. So one has to be wary about all these groups and their agendas. And what you see in the US is, and by the way, in many cases, very similar groups of people or networks are involved in doing similar things in India. After all, if you look at those who opposed to Charlie Kirk's idea and therefore kind of egged on that assassination, say similar things about India as well. This is not to suggest that I knew much about Charlie Kirk to start with.
Sure. But it's...
I really found out mostly about him
after
his assassination. I mean, I'd heard his name, but I can't say I had followed him. But the fact of the matter is, similar things, similar anarchic things are done in other countries as well. And we should have no sympathy about this. And I'm saying this with full responsibility on a day when the Maoists have said that they will finally come to the table and do a ceasefire and so on. The Naxalites had just 10-15 years ago, they had spread through 160 districts of this country. There were many parts of this country that were no-go zones for the government or ordinary citizens. From that, we have come to a point where they have been reduced to a few districts here and there, and even there, they are finding it impossible to hold out, and in fact, they want to come. They have themselves stated that they want to now, lay down their arms. We'll see how that goes. But let me say that what the Naxalites are saying in the interiors, that feeds off what happens in the so-called intellectuals who kind of support all of this kind of thinking for their own reasons. And I come from West Bengal. I have myself witnessed what is the original Naxalite movement happened in the 60s and 70s in West Bengal. And then West Bengal never recovered. The Naxalites themselves got sort of killed off, or they drifted away, or whatever happened to them. But it left behind a huge amount of damage.
Right.
And of course, their intellectual cousins then perpetuated the kind of communist kind of thinking in a way that has continued to this day, making West Bengal essentially an industrial wasteland.
That's right. Yes.
So therefore, the laying down of arms is to be just seen as step one. Really, there has to be a dismantling of the entire intellectual ecosystem, which even today very well deep roots in academia and think tanks, and even in the bureaucracy sometimes, where they have very deep roots, and the Western powers, a foreign all kinds of foreign NGOs and think tanks, etc., will be quite happy to utilize them as useful idiots to carry out their bidding.
Right.
And as a rising global power, be very, very clear that we should protect our interests, and even those who pretend to be our friends will not be entirely happy with our rise.
You remind me of an interview I'd done with the Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who warned us that you might think that Trump is your friend, and this is when we were, there was a lot of bonhomie between the two countries, that you might think that Trump is your friend, but remember, the moment India evolves and develops further, Trump will no longer be your friend. So that's something that
So I don't want to say anything about any particular individual.
Sure.
All I will say is that as we become more successful, that will be even true of your personal life. The people who you think are your friends or your relatives will be the first trying to trip you. This is true of India as well. As we now emerge as the third superpower, we are not there yet, but we are becoming now the third largest economy in the next few years. We clearly militarily and in other spaces also are an important player. Let me assure you that the incumbent powers, not just the big two, but even those who are sort of in the general vicinity, they will not be pleased about this. And so we have to build strength to the point where they understand that working for our interest is in their interest, and rather than trying to trip us. And we should be fully internally strong about this matter.
My last question is on social media. Now, social media plays a big role, and we've seen that in the last elections. 2029 is being touted as it will be a digital election. Is there a case for greater regulation of social media? Because there are two ways to it. A lot of revolutions are being fueled through social media. There's so much happening, and for India, we are in the regulatory aspect still several steps behind when it comes to
but one has to be also careful that doesn't end up
stifling free
speech.
Right.
But yes, a lot of garbage also floats around in the social media.
So it's a very fine line.
It's a fine line, and it's a tricky one. Let me say that before social media, there used to be something called mainstream media, and mainstream media was in fact entirely controlled by the old establishment of this country. When this political change happened, it happened partly because social media existed.
Well, I disagree that it was not completely controlled by the previous
Maybe a little bit was not, but most of it was. I am myself witness to it and been at the receiving end of some of it.
That is exactly what the media gets even now, that we are now Godi media.
Yeah, but you are no longer, but you see, you are even if it was the case, you do not dominate the discourse.
But having said
in the old days, there was no other pipeline for discourse.
Which is a fair point.
So therefore, it was a far more potent. Media's powers were far more potent. Now that we have social media, it should be therefore that was what allowed, I can say, the change in the discourse to happen. Otherwise, we would still be debating some Nehruvian planning or something like that, and how wonderful the Mughals were and things like that. The only reason we can argue back in public about this is because the discourse changed.
All right. Okay. Well, in our defense, just like you all are doing your job, we are doing our job to the best of our abilities. Thank you so much for that very insightful conversation, and a big thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. If you have any comments or feedback, please write to us, and do leave us your comments in the comment section below. Thanks so much, Sanjeev. Thank you.